Hey everyone! In this video, I'll introduce the basics of how genes control traits and talk a little bit about how parents pass on their traits to their offspring. Now, as you go through the video, remember to fill out the learning guide, and at the end, you should be able to answer two questions. And our two questions are, question 1, how are traits passed from parents to offspring or their children? And question 2, how do these things called genes control those traits? But first, let's just start by defining genetics, which is essentially just the study of heredity. So what is heredity? It's essentially the passing on of traits from parents to offspring. For example, traits like hair color and eye color are passed on from parents to their offspring. And we see this in humans as well as in other organisms. We see a nice inheritance of eye color being passed on from this mama cat to her kitten. So you might ask, well, why is that? How do the instructions for how to make dark hair or green eyes get passed from parents to their kids? And the answer, of course, is through sex. During sexual reproduction, the male loads the instructions for how to make his characteristics into his sperm. And the female sends her instructions for how to make her characteristics through her egg. The sperm and the egg fuse through a process called fertilization and form a zygote, which then grows into an embryo and eventually a fetus. And then, of course, is born as a child. And I think this begs the question, what form do these instructions for how to make a person take? They take the form of genes. So roughly half of the instructions for how to make a person come from dad's genes, and roughly the other half of instructions for how to make a person are coming from mom's genes, which are packaged into the sperm and egg respectively. So we've answered our first question. How are traits passed from parents to offspring? Through the inheritance of genes, delivered by sperm and egg during fertilization. And now the question becomes, exactly how are these genes controlling traits? In other words, how do genes instruct the cells of an individual to make dark hair? We'll spend lots of time on this later on in the course, but I'll just go over the basics here. A gene is made up of a molecule called DNA, which itself is made up of smaller molecules called nucleotides. These nucleotides come in 4 types: A, C, T, and G. It's the order or sequence of these nucleotides within a gene that holds the instructions for how to make a person. In this example, how to make dark hair. For the most part, different people have very similar DNA sequences, but small differences can account for differences in appearance. For example, one DNA sequence could give dark hair, like Michelle here, while a different DNA sequence could give light hair, like Gwen here. The sequence of Michelle's gene is CAT, CAT, CAT. While for the same gene in Gwen, the sequence is CAT, CCT, CAT. And in this hypothetical example, this small change in nucleotide sequence from an A to a C changes hair color. But remember that DNA itself doesn't actually do anything. It doesn't make the pigment that makes hair dark, for example. It only holds the instructions for how to make the molecule that does actually make this pigment, which in most cases is protein. How DNA directs the production of protein is known as gene expression. This is also known as the central dogma of molecular biology because it plays such an important role in molecular biology and genetics. The first step in gene expression is called transcription, where many RNA copies of DNA, RNA being a similar molecule to DNA, are made. These RNA molecules, like the DNA molecules that they are copies of, also hold the instructions for how to make a protein. The next step in gene expression is called translation, where the instructions in RNA are read and protein is produced. This protein carries out a cellular function, some job inside the cell or sometimes even outside of it. In our hair color example, it would be the production of melanin, which is the pigment that makes hair darker. In our example, how much melanin a given person's proteins produce determines hair color, which is a trait. The proteins that Michelle's genes produce make more melanin than the proteins that Gwen's genes produce. This is why Gwen has lighter hair than Michelle. So, how do genes control traits? Through gene expression. The types of genes a person has, along with their environment, determines the traits that they show. Michelle's version of this gene, which through gene expression produces more melanin, gives her dark hair, whereas Gwen's version of this gene, which through gene expression produces less melanin, gives her lighter hair. Now, humans have around 22,000 different genes, each with a different DNA sequence, and each encoding a different protein that carries out a different function. And they're all being expressed at this very moment inside the cells in your body. Okay, so at this point you should be able to explain both how genes control traits and how traits get passed on from parents to offspring. If you can't, feel free to rewind the video and watch part or all of it again, and make sure that you complete the learning guide as well. Now, in the next video, I'll start teaching you the language of genetics, and this is really important, mainly because I want you guys to be able to understand what the heck I'm talking about for most of the course. So hopefully that'll be nice for you. See you all later.